I was just complimenting John Lopez. That's actually the best of many of his presentations that I've seen. And they keep getting better. And I was thanking you all for inviting me. And I think you know why I refer to SLFPAE as the levee board. You know, it's one of the hardest things. I mean, there's just no way of saying that easily. The first thing I want to do is tell you who we are. After Katrina, 53,000 people, there was obviously great unhappiness with the old levee board. 53,000 people signed a petition that demanded a special session of the state legislature. You all got it. I'm sure some of you here probably signed it. That special session led to a constitutional amendment which passed with 81% of the vote statewide and over 90% of the vote in the New Orleans metro area. And as a result, and despite opposition from many politicians in the state legislature who liked the old system, we were created as, a regional board, although the levee districts, the East Jefferson, Orleans, and Lake Bourne levee districts still remain separate with a one board overseeing all of them. We also have jurisdiction over St. Tammany and Tangipahoa. Our board members are selected by a special nominating committee, which is composed of deans of the state's colleges of engineering, representatives of the state's engineering and scientific societies, and two good government groups. There is no member of the government, no one appointed by any politician on that nominating committee. Once nominated, the governor has to choose somebody advanced to him off the list. And they are meeting Monday. They will advance 2 names to the governor for each vacancy. The governor has to pick one of them off that list, as long as they meet the deadline, which is Monday. They're meeting Monday. If they wait until October 1st, then the governor can pick anybody he wants. My term has expired, and I have applied for reappointment. The governor has promised that he will not reappoint me. I ran into him on an airplane, as a matter of fact, a week ago. I said, I've actually known him since before he ever ran for office. And on occasion, after Katrina, we had a couple of really long, hard talks. And anyway, I said, Governor, you're firing me. He said, not from your day job. So, we will see. I hope I'm renominated. That's not a guarantee. But if not, we will find out. We'll find out pretty soon. Why are we suing? Because we believe the oil companies broke the law. And they failed to live up to their contractual obligations. As a result, the burden on us to protect the lives and property inside our jurisdiction is increased dramatically. As John just demonstrated, and saying that comes from the Pontchartrain Basin Foundation, the levees protect the people and the land protects the levees. The land outside the levees protects the levee system, cuts down storm surge. Without that buffer zone out there, the lower the storm surge, then it's increased against the levee system, and the burden on us becomes much greater. More expensive, harder, more difficult, in some cases potentially almost impossible. Now, we have never claimed that the oil industry is responsible for all the land loss. But even the industry admits that they are responsible for some of the land loss. According to the U.S. Geological Survey and a study that John quoted in St. Penland, and in which industry scientists participated, they concluded the statewide average was 36%. That was with the responsibility of the oil and gas industry. Other studies put it higher, some put it lower, but it really varies from one spot to another depending on the kind of activity. The two reasons, one are the canals, but there's also the issue of subsidence. That so much volume has been extracted from underneath the ground, the surface of the ground sinks, so the land subsides. That's another kind of land loss as well. It's a little bit more subtle, not quite so obvious to the eye, but every bit as real. Again, we are only asking the industry to fix the part of the problem that they are responsible for. Now, what are the legal arguments behind our lawsuit? Let me quote this. The dredging canals for oil and gas pipelines took a toll on the landscape. Canals and pipelines crisscross South Louisiana marshes. Spoil banks were left randomly throughout the area, drastically altering the natural hydrology. Salt water intrusion came in and more land was lost. This is industrial negligence. Now that quote does not come from our lawsuit, although it could have. That quote comes from the state's master plan. Garrett Graves himself has said publicly, I'm the first one to say there's liability there. He also goes on to say the scars are on the land, they're right there. In fact, someone from the Gulf Restoration Network, I like this line, John Henderson, in a public comment at one of the meetings, replied and said, excuse me, but they're not scars. They're deep gashes and we're bleeding out. So Garrett and the state master plan are pretty good reasons, state forthrightly why we're suing. But let's talk a quote from the Louisiana Legal Code. Mineral exploration and extraction shall be maintained in such a manner to maintain natural water flow regimens, avoid blocking surface damage, and avoid erosion. Now, most of the operation of these companies was done under permits. Let me quote a couple of the permits. The permittee shall maintain the structure or work authorized herein in good condition and in accordance with the plans and drawings attached hereto. The project shall be restored to as near pre-project conditions as possible. There's another permit. Right is reserved to require such changes, alterations, repairs, relocations, and removals may at any time be considered necessary to provide proper safe protection to life and property. Such changes, additions, repairs, and relocations shall be borne by the applicant. Now, let me quote Bob B., whose name may be familiar to you, as a scientist who led the National Science Foundation's investigation of the causes of Katrina. But before he became a professor at Berkeley in California, for years, for decades, he was Shell's chief offshore engineer, very involved in the industry. And he said in an affidavit for the state, not for us, quote, industry activities have contributed significantly to the loss of natural defenses. In several important cases, it was the loss of these natural defenses that contributed to the unanticipated breaches of flood protection facilities that protected the greater New Orleans area during Hurricane Katrina and led to repeated flooding during Hurricane Rita. In several important cases, it was the loss of these natural defenses that contributed to the unanticipated breaches. So that's the independent scientist and an affidavit for the state of Louisiana. There's another legal theory, it's not a theory, it's a doctrine, which exists in Louisiana, goes back to the Romans. Louisiana has civil code, the rest of the country has an English common law tradition, but we have, goes back, as I said, because of the French and Spanish, we have a different legal tradition. And that is called servitude of grain, that doctrine. And that doctrine says that a person who owns one property cannot increase the flow of water on someone else's property. And it's pretty clear that by destroying the land, the storm surge that comes against our levees has increased. So that's pretty much the case. We think it's pretty simple. There has not been a single comment from anyone in the industry or anyone in the state government who's opposed this lawsuit who says we are wrong on the substance of the lawsuit. I've already quoted Garrett Graves saying, yeah, there's liability. I'm the first one to say it. And industry side, even Chris John, the former congressman who's the head of the Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association, the trade association with the big oil, you know, Exxon, Shell, so forth. You know, he wrote an op-ed in the Times-Picayune conceding that the industry was responsible for some of the damage, and even saying how it's in their self-interest to restore the coast because it protects their infrastructure. Absolutely right, it is in their self-interest to restore the coast because it does protect their infrastructure. So what are the objections to the lawsuit? Now I'm taking Garrett Graves and Garrett. Well, you don't have the authority. Who the hell are you? You're just a levee board. Well, we have invited them time after time. Whenever they say we don't have the authority to sue, we have invited them, we have begged them to challenge our authority in court because we know we're going to win. We have the authority. They know it. That's why they have never challenged us in court. I am on the CPRA. In the August meeting of the CPRA, they passed a resolution opposing our lawsuit. And as they were voting on it, I asked Garrett, I was not allowed to vote no. I was ordered to recuse myself by the state's attorneys. They said they were protecting me. There was a violation of the code of ethics if I voted no. I asked Garrett, well, does this resolution authorize legal action by CPRA against the lawsuit? And he looked kind of glum and said no. So they're trying to call their bluff, and even this resolution CPRA passed opposing the lawsuit does not authorize them to take legal action. Doesn't even give them the option. So it's totally empty because they know we have the authority. Okay, that's number one. Number two, you're interfering with the BP lawsuit. The day after you filed, BP dropped its offer $2 billion. You believe that one? Do you believe that one? You know, BP has turned hard long before we filed our lawsuit. They're now suing the state because the state is demanding that they remove the booms that were put out into the Gulf to gather the oil from the spill. They just left them out there. And the state's trying to make them do it, and BP is suing the state. You know, I mean, in our lawsuit, term that, you know, is a problem? No. Plus, the trial for BP is ongoing. We're not going to trial for at least 2 years. Their trial will be over by the time our trial starts, long before our trial starts. So while there is a small technical possibility that something we might find in discovery might conceivably affect the BP trial, that's only a tiny possibility and it's only theoretical. The reality is there is virtually no way anything we're doing can affect the BP trial outcome. And once the trial's over and they go to appeal, assuming they do go to appeal, the way BP's fighting right now, it doesn't look like there'll be a settlement. You know, you can't introduce new facts. So if there were anything that came out in our trial, after that trial's over, it could not be used. So the BP line it just makes no sense. Another argument, our lawsuit is going to interfere with economic development. It's going to scare people away. Well, it seems to me the oil industry is going to leave when the oil's gone. The industry goes places in the world where they literally have to hire private armies to protect the oil fields from guerrillas terrorists, and whatnot. And you really think they're going to be scared off from the United States by a lawsuit? I don't believe that's likely. And in fact, Garrett told us directly, told our board directly, at one point that there was this super secret big deal that the state was cooking up, and that suddenly our lawsuit put it in jeopardy, one of the biggest economic development projects in the history of the state. It was so secret he couldn't really tell us about it, but he'd tell us anyway. It was just in the paper yesterday. Shell's expanding, likely expanding a plant, a $12.5 billion expansion. Apparently our lawsuit didn't scare them off. They already invested tens of millions of dollars in planning and other getting permits and so forth. They haven't made a final decision yet, and they may still not build that plant. But if they don't, it's not going to be because of the lawsuit. It's going to be because of other business reasons. That is a big company. It's one of the biggest in the world. And they're not going to be deterred by whatever we're doing on a legal front, which you're going to have to pay for anyway if we win, whether they build that plant or not. Another reason he gave us was what we are doing will interfere with industry cooperation elsewhere in the state. And honestly, this one may be true. That there are other levee boards that gets things like free rights of way from the oil industry. It's possible that the industry may rear up on its hind legs and say, no, we're not going to cooperate. That's possible. But the reality, these rights of way are over marshland that's worthless. And in addition, when you stop and think about what the lawsuit could engender, that it actually could bring the kind of money necessary to solve the big problems. Those free rights of way don't account for much in the greater scheme of things. And the final reason Garrett will raise as to why we are wrong to go forward is that we're interfering with efforts in the federal government and in Congress to direct more federal money our way for offshore revenue. Now what they're talking about is a bill which I definitely support. Senator Landrieu's introduced it. It's called the FAIR Act. And right now, beginning in 2017, the legislation was already passed a few years ago, but beginning in 2017, 37.5%, when the oil industry takes oil and gas out of offshore wells, they pay taxes to the federal government. And beginning in 2017, 37.5% of that revenue will go to the entire Gulf, all the Gulf states. Louisiana will get about half of it. However, that money is capped at $500 million for the entire Gulf, which Louisiana will get about $250 million. The legislation now introduced will raise that cap, eliminate it, so we will get a lot more money every year. There are two issues that I have with that. It's not a problem. I support the legislation. But the first is reality, political reality. It's quite possible, some people think it's likely, that on October 1st, the federal government is going to close down because of a fight over spending. And does somebody really think, in this fiscal climate, that the government, the federal government, is going to send a couple $1 billion a year more to the Gulf? I think that's extremely unlikely. There is plenty of what's referred to as Katrina fatigue, not only in Washington, but in Baton Rouge. So first, political reality says that law is not going to pass. Secondly, the reason, we have an anti-tax government. And I am puzzled why an anti-tax governor wants taxpayers to pay for something that the oil and gas industry wrote. His reason is because the federal government, through the Corps of Engineers, caused some of the problems, which it did, and that they want to hold the federal government accountable, which I agree with, then by the exact same logic, why would you not want to hold the oil industry accountable for the share of the problem that it caused? So that's my debate with Garrett. That's my rebuttal. And, you know, I mean, there's one more thing that I can think of saying, that when the CPRA met in August, we were in Dulas in Terrebonne. And it was orchestrated. You know, everybody was urged to come out and beat up on us for our lawsuit. There were so many emails flying around urging people to go out and beat up on us. Even I got an email. I don't know what list I got on for that, but whatever. And, you know, one of the people got up and spoke and said, I'm the past president of the Chamber of Commerce in Omaha, wherever it was. And she said, you know, we just passed a parish tax, a sales tax on ourselves to pay for our flood protection system, which they did. And I oppose your lawsuit. And I'm sitting up there very politely. I didn't even bother to rebut it, although I kind of regret that now. I was being polite and just listening. Chiefly because there are a lot of public comments and wanted to get to the meeting. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, wait a second. You just passed a parish tax. Did it ever occur to you that if the oil industry in Terrebonne paid for its share of the damage in Terrebonne, you wouldn't have had to pass a parish tax. You would have built the flood protection system you already had. Not only that, the system that they are building is not going to meet the 100-year standards because they can't afford it, which means their flood insurance rates are still going to be sky high. And if they did what we're doing, then maybe they'd have a 100-year system and they wouldn't have a flood insurance problem. So I think, I guess the last thing I'm going to say is, you know, as much as I disagree with the governor on a lot of the issues which he's pursued as governor, when you speak about the coast, as a general rule, you really have to say he's been a good to very good governor for the coast. He really has. And what I have always said, and we'll say again tonight, I would like him to be a great governor for the coast. And our lawsuit only involves our jurisdiction, the east bank of the Mississippi River. Most of the damage, by far most of the damage, is to our west, much more than we have. And what would make him a great governor would be if at some point in the next few months he wakes up and says, why don't I solve the problem? We are not the problem. Our lawsuit is not the problem. The problem is the coast. Why doesn't he just tell the industry it's time? And sit down at the legislature, cut a deal, give them some kind of protection from all these lawsuits which are going to be coming now that we have started to articulate some theories of law which are viable for a lot of people. There are a lot more lawsuits that even if they kill ours, those others could not be killed because they'd be by private parties. Sit down, give them immunity, cut a deal, get a good contribution from the industry, and let's fulfill the master plan. That's it. Now, yes, we'll sit over there and both of us take questions. Okay.